One of Nintendo's greatest mysteries dates all the way back to 1983, when they split their greatest legacy in two. Miyamoto was following up on the two hugely successful Donkey Kong games with a game not about the giant gorilla, but the generic little man. A surprising move, for sure, but that's not even the weirdest part. That same year, Nintendo also put out Donkey Kong 3. The big gorilla is still front and center in a big way, but now he's lowering into a greenhouse with his army of bugs, and you control Stanley the Bugman from Game & Watch Greenhouse and his trusty bug slash gorilla repellent. Now I get that old games can get pretty trippy, but there has to be some sort of explanation for this one. But to my knowledge, nobody has ever asked. So until we get the real story, this is the best theory that I have. Developed mostly by fellow Stanley the Bugman enthusiast, Chefgon. A couple years earlier, Nintendo had nearly ended their video game business by betting the farm on Radar Scope, the famously not-so-successful outer space shooter that was hastily reworked into a game about a large ape. But years later, clearly shooting games weren't going anywhere. So Nintendo, who was already known for their bright, colorful, detailed visuals, decided to have their own take on the shooter genre. So what they did is they developed an arcade shooter based on Greenhouse, the Game & Watch game with interesting original characters and really a clever take on shooting. Now it's worth noting that turning an LCD handheld game into a stand-up arcade cabinet was something that had never been done before. It was sort of unheard of, like turning a no-budget podcast into a big-budget motion picture. Now the new Greenhouse would feel like a traditional shooter with a lot of unique enemy types and a little bit of platforming just to keep things fresh. And the centerpiece of the whole game, filled up most of the screen, was the ultimate enemy, a constantly looming threat that was always bearing down on you. And that was a giant, slowly lowering spider. So Greenhouse was coming along nicely, but Nintendo was still kind of unsure about releasing their new wave of arcade games with no Donkey Kong at all. Now, the games industry moved a lot faster back then, but don't forget, it had only been 2 years since Radar Scope nearly ended their stake in video games. So Nintendo took another look at this Greenhouse game. It was already being developed as a kit for DK and Junior cabinets, and it already featured a giant, memorable enemy that was the largest thing on screen. All it took was a few redone art assets, and Greenhouse became Donkey Kong 3. Now the rest of the characters, enemies, and setting remain unchanged, so don't let the title fool you. Donkey Kong 3 is a Greenhouse sequel through and through. It just happens to have Donkey Kong in it. But by now, we all know that Mario Bros. Was the way of the future, and DK3 gets largely overlooked. In the long run, really, the rebranding hurt it quite a bit. It's a wonderful game, but it's such a departure that even today, most people don't know what to make of it. He may be an important part of Nintendo history, but Stanley the Bugman has never been heard from again since. But it's probably okay. I don't think the Mario series will ever run out of interesting characters to fill its games with. Right, Baby Daisy? God damn it!